I'm sure you've heard the phrase before, it is what it is. It's a phrase that we use often when we can't explain why things have to be the way that they are, and it's definitely a way to dismiss or explain away disappointment, right? Like, yeah, my car broke down again. I mean, it just is what it is. Like, I gotta have to figure out how to find the money to get it fixed. Or, yeah, I mean, I went out in my garage the other day and it's just like a mess out there. And honestly, I'm just too busy right now to get it straightened out. It just is what it is. You know, the cost of food is expensive. The cost of building materials are expensive. The cost of gas is expensive. It just is what it is. You know, there's nothing I can really do to change it. There's nothing I can do in my own strength and my own power to deal with it. It just is what it is. And oftentimes in our lives, we use that to, like, tell coworkers or family members or our children, I wish it doesn't have to be this way, but it is what it is. But I want to challenge that viewpoint when it comes to your faith. Because faith doesn't accept it is what it is. Faith accepts it is what it isn't. Yes, in the natural, this seems undoable, but with God, all things are possible. In the regular, this seems like it's not going to be able to pan out, but I believe that God's going to do exceedingly abundantly above more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine. And so this idea of strengthening our faith, developing our faith, growing our faith, with living with this expectation that I'm going to receive from God more than I anticipated, that I'm not going to just settle for it is what it is, but I'm going to believe God for more than what it is a powerful idea. This is probably the quintessential sums up what it means by someone to be a person of faith. Not just a person of religious experience, but someone who believes that God's going to do more than what's anticipated or more than what's expected, that he's going to go above and beyond. One of my favorite passages that sort of paint this picture is in Matthew chapter 5. There's Jesus, like he always is, with a large crowd of people. Matthew chapter 5, verse 24. It says, "A great crowd followed him and thronged about him. And there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, who had suffered much under many physicians and spent all that she had, and she was no better, rather she grew worse. She heard reports about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, 'If I could just touch even his garments, I'll be made well.' Immediately, the flow of blood dried up, and she felt her body that she was healed from her disease. Jesus, perceiving in himself the power had gone out from him, immediately turned around and said to the crowd, 'Who touched my garments?' The disciples said to him, 'Lord, you see this crowd pressing all around you, and yet you say, "Who touched me?"' He looked around to see who had done it, but the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. She said, and he says, 'Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease.'" When you set the stage for this, you have this captivating story of this woman who reached out to Jesus in faith, but there's a deeper lesson to be learned in this moment. Faith reaches out to God. Faith doesn't just wait on God to do something. Faith takes action. In fact, in James, he says faith without works, faith without action might as well be dead. Faith requires action. Sometimes action is physical, sometimes it's verbal, but in this case, this lady, she knows that if she could just get close enough to Jesus to just make contact, even with just the hem of his garment, that she'd be healed. And so she heard reports about Jesus, verse 27 and 28, and she came up behind him in the crowd, and she says, "If I can just touch him, then I'll be made whole." We see in this passage the woman, despite her desperate position and condition, societal limitations, she doesn't let anything hold her back from seeking Jesus. Her faith propels her to reach out and get a hold of his clothes, just so that she can find some sort of connection, some touch of Jesus to find that healing. Now again, in an ancient Jewish world, like this woman with the issue of blood, she's been on her cycle for 12 years, constantly bleeding. She would have been weak. She would have been, looked at as unclean, outcast. She has no money. She spent all of it going to doctors trying to get healed. So for all we know at this point, she's borderline homeless or already homeless. She has to go outside in the outskirts of town and live anyway because it's a constant, issue for her to be unclean always. And yet her faith has an expectation of healing. Does your faith have an expectation of healing? Like an expectation of life change? Are you living a faith-filled life full of expectation? That I believe God's going to heal. I believe that life change is going to happen. I believe that my friends are going to come to the knowledge of Jesus. I believe that God's going to provide a way for me emotionally, physically, financially, spiritually to accomplish the dreams and purposes that he has in store for me. She had faith that if she just touched his garments, if she could just get close enough to just touch him. I don't need to talk to him. I don't need him to pray for me. I don't need him to touch me. I just need to get close enough to touch him. And I know that I'll be healed. Of course, Jesus perceives the power that leaves him when her faith is activated because she acts upon her faith, living in expectation and taking action. And Jesus says, "Who touched me?" And the disciples are like, "Of course somebody touched you." Faith has an expectation. The woman believes that even just touching the very edge of his garments is going to unleash the power of healing in her lives. And so because she stepped out in that expectation, the power of God flows through Jesus into her, and she experiences healing. How often are you approaching Jesus with that level of expectation? I mean, as you examine your heart and you challenge your worldview, are you in need of raising your expectations of healing and second chances and new beginnings and restorations in your life? Because God wants to exceed our expectations and demonstrate his power in our lives, but we also have to come with those expectations. I can imagine all the reasons that the woman could have given up, could have quit, could have stopped. But when she heard that Jesus was going to be there, I mean, honestly, I can only imagine that she's so weak that she's just barely making her way through the crowd. And all she's trying to do is get close enough to Jesus to touch him. And her expectation. Now again, there's something about a life of expectation that is the fruit of real faith. Sometimes, don't get it wrong. Well, I'm expecting, therefore God's going to have to do it. No. A life of expectation is the results or the symptom of someone who has big faith. I live with expectation because I need God to do this, and I can't do it in my own strength and my own power, my own ability. So I'm just going to trust for him to do it. So I'm coming with expectation. What is it that you need God to do in your life? What is it that you need God to do in your family? What is it you need God to do in your body, in your finances, in your friendships, in your community? What healing, emotionally, physically, and spiritually do you need God to do? Because when we live with expectation, a faithful expectation of who God is and what he's going to do, you go away from your interaction with Jesus with more than what you came for. Remember, she wanted to be healed. So she came with an expectation. If I could just touch Jesus' jacket, then I'll be healed. But if you look at verse 34, before she's immediately healed when she touches him, but he also says to her, "Go in peace and be healed of your disease." So he confirms, there's a confirmation of her healing, but then there's also this gift of peace. The miraculous healing of the woman is just the beginning. Jesus affirms her faith and assures her that there's complete restoration and healing. This isn't a temporary thing. This isn't a Band-Aid. This isn't you've been made whole, now go live in peace. You've been living in chaos, but you've come with expectation, now go in peace and live in peace. The peace of God that passes understanding. Come on, we serve a God that goes above and beyond just pouring out his blessing and his favor upon those who dare to believe. We serve a God who's willing to go above and beyond and not just bring you emotional healing, but if you go back into the stories that we've been talking about, do you notice that for this lady, he says healing and peace? For the paralytic man, right? He says, you have salvation and healing. Come on. Like every time there's a healing, it's not just Jesus meeting the physical needs of the people, but it's this deeply, intrinsically powerful moment where Jesus goes, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, I'm going to make you whole. And a family is restored, or a whole village is in awe of the power of God, or the friends bring a group of friends bring someone and their lives radically changed. Why? Because faith was put into action. They lived with expectation. Don't let doubts keep you from accomplishing the plans and purposes that God has in store for you. Put your doubts aside and step out in big faith. Are you settling for what is? Or are you believing God for what could be? I choose to believe God for what could be. Sure, it is what it is today. But I believe that if I can get close enough in my life to the very presence of Jesus, that he's going to bring a way out of what seems to be no way. That he's going to bring healing. Even if it's been 12 years of suffering, he's going to bring peace and healing. Even if it's been a lifetime of being paralyzed, he's going to bring salvation and healing. Even if the devil's tried to take me out or take out one of my family members, that he's going to bring restoration to their mind, their heart, their soul, and he's going to capture their heart. Why? Because that's who Jesus is, exceedingly and abundantly above more than we could ever ask, think, or imagine. The story that we looked at today reminds us that God's power knows no bounds, that he wants to do more in your life than you could even imagine. My question is for you are you ready to step out in faith, reaching out to God with expectation to receive more than you came for? Maybe it's time to let go of those limitations. Maybe it's time to let go of those doubts. Maybe it's time to stop living with the moniker of it is what it is. And embrace the abundant life that God has in store for you and I. What if you dared to believe? What if you dared to receive? What if you dared to be transformed? Isn't that what we're talking about? Isn't this what it's supposed to be about? It could be so much more. All you have to do is reach out and touch him. All you have to do is have faith. All you have to do is come with expectation, and God will meet and exceed your expectation. Yeah, it is what it is, but it could be different. It could be something more. It could be something greater if you only put your faith in Jesus.